Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, Krista. I'm really excited to be here. Let's kick this thing off. I'm going to move pretty fast. I have a lot that I want to talk about today, and I hope that it's entertaining for you all. You should see this enterprise user experience screen. Is that right, Krista? All right. Okay, cool. Well, let's get started. So my name is Andy Basiri. I'm the Director of Design here at BP3, and I'm really excited to talk about UX today. So first, a little bit about me. I've been working in design for about 15 years in multiple industries. I specialize in helping clients design large-scale, complex enterprise applications. I'm an expert interaction designer, sprint facilitator, and while at BP3 for the last 4 years, I've done a lot of amazing work with our clients to design custom solutions for things like dialysis care or telecom, construction management, even some stuff for hospitality, cruise lines, stuff like that. You might have heard about some of that yesterday. And most recently, I've been helping customers as a certified sprint facilitator and designer to catalyze product-led operational transformation. So we're going to talk about that. So we're going to go through, I think it's really important because we hear this a lot when we're talking about UX is UI, right? So what's the difference between UX and UI? Just to clarify, because it's going to be important as we go. We're going to talk with my friend John Morcus. He's one of our partners about UX maturity, and that should be fun. We're going to talk about design process and principles, UX impact with my friend Nick Loining at Essentia Health. We're going to talk about bringing that all together and how that maximizes ROI. And then we're going to talk to some of our engineers about the value from their perspective of UX. And then we'll have some time for questions. So first off, UX and UI are not the same thing. All right, so let's get into this. So, you know, like this, you know, you can kind of think about the way people think about UX is kind of like UI is this top part of the iceberg here, right? But really, in order to talk about UX, I think we need to talk about design thinking. So then you understand holistically what we're talking about. And this is even when we talk about design thinking, this is how people think about it. But in order to understand that, we need to kind of talk about what it is. So I like this definition from Tim Brown, who wrote the book Change by Design. And he said, design thinking in business uses the designer's sensibility and methods to match people's needs with what is technologically feasible and what a viable business strategy can convert into customer value and market opportunity. So what does that mean? So we'll talk about a little bit about that. So I think the way that people typically think about design thinking and design, you know, work is that design thinking is purely just for the designers, right? We have these siloed mentality about business, design, and tech, but really how we want to think about it is how do we bring these things together? Our goal is to align business needs, right, the need to generate revenue, with human needs, right, so it solves a problem for a person or even the business by way of the person, right, because that's how we deliver business value, and technical requirements. Is it feasible? Is it reliable? To create something that brings all of that into focus by meeting the needs of its users, is technologically feasible and generates value. Now, I like this quote about design thinking from Fast Company, and basically it just says, it's a proven and repeatable problem-solving protocol. It's a process, right? And we love processes here at BP3, right? So the way design thinking materializes as a process, because not only is it a philosophy, a way of thinking, a way of doing, it's also a process. And there's many flavors of this now. You'll see a lot of this happening now, proliferating. But at this point, I think that people treat design thinking like it's old hat, right? But it's really like the foundational differentiating methodology and process that I think successful business teams, product teams use today. And there's 6 phases of that. First is empathize, like this idea, and this is a graphic from Nielsen Norman Group, right? So this is where we collect data and understand our business space, our problem space, our users, all that. Then we define, we go through that data and we figure out what we can actually do, what problems there are. We ideate on those problems, we prototype, right, creating something testable. Then we test it. This is how we get data to understand if our design meets user needs. And then we implement it, right? So we'll get more into that and about kind of like our process for product development. But the thought even though we conceptualize it as a process, as circular, right, because it's iterative, sometimes it's going to look something like this. I like to say it feels like this. It's kind of all over the place, but really the important thing to remember is that you're using what you learn in every phase to inform the next. So this structure gives us a means by which we can deliver creative solutions because we can learn by doing, and we can use that to expand our understanding and view of how to build the right solution. So now from like a product design and development perspective, this is incomplete, and we'll talk more about that later. So let's shelf that for a moment. So what is UX? UX, user experience, is a person's perceptions and responses resulting from or anticipated use and anticipated use of a product, system, or service. So there's a lot of things that can contribute to that, right? A person's experience is a consequence of things like branding, presentation, functionality, performance, and even just like a user's internal state, like resulting from, let's say, like prior experiences, their attitudes, their skills, their personality, and really the context of use, and more importantly, their goals, like what are they trying to accomplish? So the mission of UX designers is to study the needs, wants, and goals, the motivations, the mental models, the attitudes, the environment, etc., right? All this stuff of users in order to create things that are viable, things that are usable, things that are useful is really important. You know, like these are really the dimensions that we measure something that that creates a good user experience. And some techniques we use to get those designs are things like design sprints, right? Design sprints are a kind of workshop. It's like a 5-day workshop. We use workshops, rapid prototyping, card sorting, heuristic evaluation, and then design research, like interviews, observational studies, stuff like that. So these are just a few ways we can develop the foresight, really, to understand what needs to be designed and how designs might work to be received when implemented, right? So what that person's experience is going to be. So this diagram kind of shows the spectrum of things that encompass or affect user experience. You can see here, there's a lot on here, right? But they still cover those 3 foundational areas we talked about, which is design, business, and technology, right? And that's all those things coming together is the user experience. So you can see here, marketing, back-end processes, performance, information architecture, style guides, surface design. And here you can see that user interfaces are just like a small part of what makes the user experience. So then, what is UI? UI is merely the interactive presentation layer of the product. And it shouldn't be discounted at the level of impact a UI can have on user experience. The skills that it takes to produce great user interfaces, just can't be understated. And you can see here, there's a lot of things that go into that. There's also something called Gestalt principles, which is kind of the psychology of how we perceive space and information and group information, right? So there's a lot of things at play here. But the reason UX, design thinking, research, prototyping, testing, all that, the reason it's important is because what users want and need don't always match what we expect or what we design for that matter. And that mismatch could have serious consequences, all right? So for example, you can see there's this, it looks like a Twitter post here. So I don't know if you all remember this, in 2018, I believe it was. Yeah, there was that alarm that went out in Hawaii about a missile attack, right? and it created a lot of panic. And this is actually the UI for that. They look like link buttons, right? So when you look at this, you're just like, well, these aren't buttons. Surely I click on this and it goes somewhere new. And like, no, this actually activated that system. Another example from the book, Tragic Design, is actually this one back here, you can see, where a young cancer patient actually died from toxicity because nurses couldn't see the critical alerts that were important for her care that would have prevented her death. So now, it doesn't have to be this extreme, but bad UX can generate poor outcomes for the people who experience it and more importantly, for the people that we're talking to today, for your business, right? It can mean poor outcomes. So while rationally thinking, this design makes sense, right? Like you might perceive it as this design makes sense. The reality is that designs can be easy to rationalize depending on your point of view and the knowledge you already have. However, from like a rational point of view, behavior isn't always predictable because behavior is oftentimes by measure irrational. There are a lot of psychological principles at play when it comes to how people make decisions and value judgments. And these have consequences for the things we design. We learn a lot about this through behavioral economists like Daniel Kahneman, Richard Thaler, Dan Ariely, Barry Schwartz. And the psychological concepts might be things like choice overload, anchoring, loss aversion, right? And despite really the title here you can see of Dan Ariely's book, Particularly Irrational, these effects aren't always easily predictable when designing complex solutions. And that's why we base our design on things like this: business goals, design best practice, user goals, needs, and wants, right, which requires research, business stakeholder and user feedback, technical requirements and constraints, research, right? Research to understand and validate our solution is being used and has the desired effect we intend it to have. You know, is it useful? Is it desirable? Is it usable? So which in turn allows us to design exceptional user experiences. And a great user experience includes functionality and data and content, right, that provide business value. They're easy for users to figure out. They help people do their tasks or meet their goals, efficiencies, and you know, importantly, also people like using it. And when you create a good user experience, you generate good outcomes for your business, right? We've seen successes like fewer user errors, user efficiency, lower training costs, lower support costs, less rework from development, and higher employee retention. And we'll talk a little bit more about that.